Welcome to Trump Breaking News Network, your daily source for up-to-date news on the political scene of Donald Trump, his presidency, American politics and conspiracies. Please subscribe to receive notice of our daily updates. Also share with your friends and your social media. We encourage you to like our videos and give your comments.
This is TBNN.
Senator Nancy Schafer was murdered because he fought against CPS child kidnapping. Georgia Senator Nancy Schafer may have known more about state-sponsored kidnappings than any other politician in the United States before she was murdered in March of 2010. Her published report, The Corrupt Business of Child Protective Services, is reproduced below. It was the basis for many lectures and interviews she gave on the topic. She claims the report caused her to lose her Senate seat in the Georgia State Senate, but she stated, "However, there are causes worth losing over." This cause was so big, however, that there are some who believe she lost more than just her job. They believe she lost her very life. On March 26, 2010, police from Habersham County, Georgia reported that they found Nancy Schafer and her husband Bruce Schafer dead in their home. The official report was that it was a murder-suicide, and that Bruce Schafer had killed his wife and then turned his .38 caliber handgun on himself. Their daughter reportedly found them in their bedroom, and investigators say they discovered a suicide note, as well as notes to each of the couple's 5 children. However, many have questioned the official police report. Of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution published an article on April 4, 2010 titled, "What Really Took Two Lives in Schafer Case?" Some excerpts from Mark Davis' article. And yet, people talk. They talk about a twosome that was rarely apart. About a woman who achieved renown for her unapologetic stands against abortion and overzealous child protective services. "You hardly ever saw one without the other," said Robert Buster Smith, whom Bruce often visited when Nancy came to town from their Clarkettville home to get her hair done. A Tacoan native, Smith saw Bruce Schafer on the last Tuesday of his life when he stopped by Smith's furniture store. "He seemed like his old self," said Smith. "I have a hard time believing it happened like it happened." Nancy Schafer was a former officer of the Georgia Baptist Convention, and the Baptist Press also ran a piece on the murder. Nancy Schafer, conservative activist, killed. They also raised the question as to whether the police report was accurate. However, at least one friend of the Schafers has questioned the murder-suicide theory. Garland Favorito, founder of Voters Organized for Trusted Election Results in Georgia, VoterGA, circulated an 11.2-page bulletin via the internet stating it is more obvious that the case is a murder made to look like suicide. Favorito cited the Christian faith and pro-life beliefs of the Schafers and the fact that Nancy Schafer had been delving into alleged corruption in family and child services agencies. I looked up Garland Favorito's bulletin and found it online. Here's what he wrote. "Although off-topic, I felt led to do one more update on the Schafer family with some new information. I want to particularly thank the progressives and Democrats who responded with encouragement to my previous article by recognizing that the child abuse and trafficking against which Senator Schafer fought for the last 2 years of her life is a nonpartisan issue that transcends political party boundaries." On Wednesday, March 31, over 1,000 people flocked to Ebenezer Baptist Church in Toccoa, Georgia to pay last respects to former state senator, Nancy Schafer, and husband, Bruce. Pastor Andy Childs focused on the forgiveness of sins and eternal life available to all mankind through Jesus Christ. He felt they would have wanted it that way. Pastor Childs also mentioned that he researched Nancy Schafer's efforts in child protective services, which I believe will eventually become her legacy and greatest work. Many people in line and at the service who knew Bruce Bear Schafer were still consumed with doubt that he would do something so uncharacteristic as to kill his wife and himself. More information is gradually coming to light about the couple's financial troubles that may have led to the tragedy, but several points have fostered doubt. The Schafers were receiving death threats that had accelerated. There was no indication from Bruce Schafer of him being under any kind of stress that would cause him to commit such an uncharacteristic act right up to the eve of their death. Nancy Schafer was completing a video exposing the lack of oversight in Georgia's Department of Family and Child Services, DFCS, as well as Child Protective Services, CPS, nationally. I spoke at some length with the video producer, William Wilkie Fain. Both he and other friends of the family corroborate that Bruce had complained of investment losses and they had just received a foreclosure notice on the magnificent home they owned. They had put their home up for sale a couple months earlier but had been unable to sell it or another property in such a down market. Still, many of the couple's friends questioned whether their financial condition was really severe enough to warrant such an uncharacteristic drastic action. Burning psychological questions remain such as 1. Why would Bruce decide to kill himself and his wife because he received a foreclosure notice on a home that they had already decided to sell 2 months earlier? 2. Why would Bruce consider the couple's financial situation so severe when their assets still appeared to exceed their secured property debt by several $100,000? 3. If Bruce was under financial stress, why did he not show any signs of it up to and including the eve of the couple's death? 4. If Bruce was under financial stress, why wouldn't he seek help from any or all of his 5 grown children who loved him and would have wanted to help? 5. Why would Bruce decide to deprive both he and Nancy of seeing the grandchildren who they loved so dearly grow up? 6. Why would Bruce knowingly take a drastic action that would devastate the children and grandchildren who loved him so much? 7. Why would Bruce, who was so highly supportive of Nancy's efforts for decades, including her CPS/DFCS work, decide to kill her just at the peak of one of her most important works? 8. Why would Bruce commit such an act that was so against his faith and completely out of character for him according to those who know him best? 9. Why would Bruce jeopardize any chance of the family collecting life insurance benefits by committing suicide and killing his wife? Nancy Schafer's interview with Alex Jones. Less than a year before she was murdered, Nancy Schafer appeared on The Alex Jones Show to discuss the American foster care and adoption business, and the terrible corruption involved with it, including bounties on children and child sex trafficking. Her interview is available via YouTube, and we reproduce it here. Part 1. Excerpts. Nancy Schafer says that CPS is unconstitutional. Parents across this country need to be warned of the dangers of child protection services nationwide. The Department of Child Protective Services has become a protected empire. It's built on taking children and separating families. After she lost her state Senate seat due to what she believes was her report on CPS, she began to talk to other state representatives and senators around the country who were being confronted with CPS issues in their district, but they told her that if they did anything, they would lose their jobs just as Nancy Schafer had. Alex Jones asked her if there were bounties on the heads of children and Mrs. Schafer said yes, and that in fact just the day before she had learned that an order had come into a CPS office stating what kind of child someone wanted to adopt. Mrs. Schafer states that the financial motive for the state to legally kidnap children was put in place in 1974 by Walter Mondale with the Adoption and Safe Families Act. This was later expanded by President Bill Clinton in 1997 with the Adoption and Safe Families Act that gave states cash bonuses for every child adopted out of foster care. Editor's note: Bill Clinton signed this bill into law, but the bill was passed by the Republican-led House and Senate led by Newt Gingrich, so it was a bipartisan effort initiated by a Republican majority in Congress. Excerpts. In this segment, Mrs. Schafer talks about how states have a base formula regarding how much each child is worth in terms of collecting federal funding, and how they can increase that formula to get all the federal funding that is available. If they get close to the end of the year and they have not collected all the funds available for that state, there is more incentive to put more children into foster care. Mrs. Schafer explained how the words "in the best interest of the child" have been redefined by CPS, whose goal is to destroy the family. She explained how grandparents often cannot even get custody of their own grandchildren when it would be in the best interest of the children to be with their grandparents. She explained how children are much more likely to be abused in foster care than they are when they are left with abusive parents. She gives first-hand experience of a case in her district where 2 little girls were removed from their mother because the mother allegedly had an unopened can of beer in her car, and the girls were placed into a foster home with many other children where they were sexually abused, including by the CPS caseworker who lived in the foster home. Excerpts. In this third segment, Mrs. Schaefer finishes the story of how she became exposed to the corruption in CPS, with a grandmother in Florida who was trying to get custody of her grandchildren in Georgia, which is the story started in the previous section. She persisted with the help of Senator Schaefer, and eventually was able to get custody of her grandchildren, but then the juvenile court judge issued an order for the girls to become the custody of their biological father who lived on the West Coast, but had never been a part of their lives. He reportedly was in the business of adult entertainment, which included pornography according to Mrs. Schaefer. Both Alex Jones and Senator Schaefer comment on how many pedophiles are involved in social services like CPS working with children. Mrs. Schaefer again reiterates that the system has to be exposed and completely dissolved. All federal funding needs to be cut off, and the rescuing of truly abused children in homes needs to become the function of law enforcement, and not social workers. This would provide due process of law. This mantra of hers to cut off funding and expose everything certainly provided a motive for someone to not want her doing the job. One of the tragic things Mrs. Schaefer said in this segment was that she was overwhelmed with calls from families losing their children all across the U.S., and they had nowhere to turn for justice. "There is nowhere to go," she stated. This reflects our own experience here at medicalkidnap.com since launching this website. Part 4. In this last segment, Alex Jones asked the senator how to fight this corruption. Mrs. Schaefer replied that she tried to pass a bill in Georgia that would have helped to stop it, but it was defeated. She mentioned the incredible bureaucracy that exists in the system, and all the jobs that Child Protection Services provided, which is a huge business. William Fain, film producer on Nancy Schaefer's work, What Happened to the Film? As you can read in Garland Favorito's report, he spoke with the film producer who was working with Nancy Schaefer to expose the smoking gun facts on the corruption of CPS, and Mr. Fain also did an interview with Alex Jones after Nancy's death. He stated that he was convinced that Nancy's death was as the police reported, and part of her husband's murder, suicide. The interview Mr. Fain conducted with Alex Jones and revealed some of the details he and Nancy Schaefer were working together to uncover can be heard here. The film was to be released a short time later, but I have found no evidence that this film was ever produced, and the filmmaker William Fain does not even own the domain name williamfain.com any longer. Here is the published report Nancy Schaefer did on CPS. My introduction into Child Protective Service cases was due to a grandmother in an adjoining state who called me with her tragic story. Her 2 granddaughters had been taken from her daughter who lived in my district. Her daughter was told wrongly that if she wanted to see her children again she should sign a paper and give up her children. Frightened and young, the daughter did. I have since discovered that parents are often threatened into cooperation of permanent separation of their children. The children were taken to another county and placed in foster care. The foster parents were told wrongly that they could adopt the children. The grandmother then jumped through every hoop known to man in order to get her granddaughters. When the case finally came to court, it was made evident by one of the foster parents' children that the foster parents had, at any given time, 18 foster children and that the foster mother had an inappropriate relationship with the caseworker. In the courtroom, the juvenile judge acted as though she was shocked and said the 2 girls would be removed quickly. They were not removed. Finally, after much pressure being applied to the Department of Family and Children Services of Georgia, DFCS, the children were driven to South Georgia to meet their grandmother who gladly drove to meet them. After being with their grandmother 2 or 3 days, the judge, quite out of the blue, wrote up a new order to send the girls to their father, who previously had no interest in the case and who lived on the West Coast. The father was in adult entertainment. His girlfriend worked as an escort and his brother, who also worked in the business, had a sexual charge brought against him. Within a couple of days the father was knocking on the grandmother's door and took the girls kicking and screaming to California. The father developed an unusual relationship with the former foster parents and soon moved back to the southeast, and the foster parents began driving to the father's residence and picking up the little girls for visits. The oldest child had told her mother and grandmother on 2 different occasions that the foster father molested her. To this day, after 5 years, this loving, caring blood relative grandmother does not even have visitation privileges with the children. The little girls are, in my opinion, permanently traumatized, and the young mother of the girls was so traumatized with shock when the girls were first removed from her that she has not recovered. Throughout this case and through the process of dealing with multiple other mismanaged cases of the Department of Family and Children's Services, DFCS, I have worked with other desperate parents and children across the state because they have no rights and no one with whom to turn. I have witnessed truthless behavior from many caseworkers, social workers, investigators, lawyers, judges, therapists, and others such as those who pick up the children. I have been stunned by what I have seen and heard from victims all over the state of Georgia. In this report, I am focusing on the Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services, DFCS. However, I believe Child Protective Services nationwide has become corrupt and that the entire system is broken almost beyond repair. I am convinced parents and families should be warned of the dangers. The Department of Child Protective Services, known as the Department of Family and Children's Service, DFCS, in Georgia and other titles in other states, has become a protected empire built on taking children and separating families. This is not to say that there are not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. This report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping, ineffective policies, and DFCS who does not remove a child or children when the child is enduring torment and abuse. See Exhibit A and Exhibit B. In one county in my district, I arranged a meeting for 37 families to speak freely and without fear. These poor parents and grandparents spoke of their painful, heart-wrenching encounters with DFCS. Their suffering was overwhelming. They wept and cried. Some did not know where their children were and had not seen them in years. I had witnessed the Gestapo at work, and I witnessed the deceitful conditions under which children were taken in the middle of the night, out of hospitals, off of school buses, and out of homes. In one county a private drug testing business was operating within the DFCS department that required many drug tests from parents and individuals for profit. In another county children were not removed when they were enduring the worst possible abuse. Due to being exposed, several employees in a particular DFCS office were fired. However, they have now been rehired either in neighboring counties or in the same county again. According to the calls I am now receiving, the conditions in that county are returning to the same practices that they had before the light was shown on their deeds. Having worked with probably 300 cases statewide, I am convinced there is no responsibility and no accountability in the system. I have come to the conclusion that poor parents oftentimes are targeted to lose their children because they do not have the wherewithal to hire lawyers and fight the system. Being poor does not mean you are not a good parent or that you do not love your child, or that your child should be removed and placed with strangers. That all parents are capable of making mistakes and that making a mistake does not mean your children are always to be removed from the home. Even if the home is not perfect, it is home, and that's where a child is the safest and where he or she wants to be, with family. That parenting classes, anger management classes, counseling referrals, therapy classes and on are demanded of parents with no compassion by the system even while they are at work and while their children are separated from them. This can take months or even years and it emotionally devastates both children and parents. Parents are victimized by the system that makes a profit for holding children longer and bonuses for not returning children. That caseworkers and social workers are oftentimes guilty of fraud. They withhold evidence. They fabricate evidence and they seek to terminate parental rights. However, when charges are made against them, the charges are ignored. That the separation of families is growing as a business because local governments have grown accustomed to having taxpayer dollars to balance their ever-expanding budgets. That Child Protective Service in juvenile court can always hide behind a confidentiality clause in order to protect their decisions and keep the funds flowing. There should be open records and court watches. Look who is being paid. There are state employees, lawyers, court investigators, court personnel, and judges. There are psychologists, and psychiatrists, counselors, caseworkers, therapists, foster parents, adoptive parents, and on. All are looking to the children in state custody to provide job security. Parents do not realize that social workers are the glue that holds the system together, that funds the court, the child's attorney, and the multiple other jobs including Dfcs's attorney. That the Adoption and the Safe Families Act, set in motion by President Bill Clinton, offered cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out of foster care. In order to receive the adoption incentive bonuses, local child protective services need more children. They must have merchandise, children, that sell, and you must have plenty of them so the buyer can choose. Some counties are known to give a $4,000 bonus for each child adopted and an additional $2,000 for a special needs child. Employees work to keep the federal dollars flowing. That there is double dipping. The funding continues as long as the child is out of the home. When a child in foster care is placed with a new family, then adoption bonus funds are available. When a child is placed in a mental health facility and is on 16 drugs per day, like 2 children of a constituent of mine, more funds are involved. That there are no financial resources and no real drive to unite a family and help keep them together. That the incentive for social workers to return children to their parents quickly after taking them has disappeared, and who in protective services will step up to the plate and say, this must end. No one, because they are all in the system together, and a system with no leader and no clear policies will always fail the children. Look at the waste in government that is forced upon the taxpayer. That the policy manual is considered the last word for Dfcs. However, it is too long, too confusing, poorly written, and does not take the law into consideration. That if the lives of children were improved by removing them from their homes, there might be a greater need for protective services, but today all children are not always safer. Children, of whom I am aware, have been raped and impregnated in foster care, and the head of a foster parents association in my district was recently arrested because of child molestation. That some parents are even told if they want to see their children or grandchildren, they must divorce their spouse. Many, who are underprivileged, feeling they have no option, will divorce and then just continue to live together. This is an anti-family policy, but parents will do anything to get their children home with them. Fathers, non-custodial parents, I must add, are oftentimes treated as criminals without access to their own children and have child support payments strangling the very life out of them. That the Foster Parents' Bill of Rights does not bring out that a foster parent is there only to care for a child until the child can be returned home. Many foster parents today use the Foster Parent Bill of Rights to hire a lawyer and seek to adopt the child from the real parents, who are desperately trying to get their child home and out of the system. That tax dollars are being used to keep this gigantic system afloat, yet the victims, parents, grandparents, guardians, and especially the children, are charged for the system's services. That grandparents have called from all over the state of Georgia trying to get custody of their grandchildren. Dfcs claims relatives are contacted, but there are cases that prove differently. Grandparents who lose their grandchildren to strangers have lost their own flesh and blood. The children lose their family heritage, and grandparents, and parents too, lose all connections to their heirs. That the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect in 1998 reported that 6 times as many children died in foster care than in the general public, and that once removed to official safety, these children are far more likely to suffer abuse, including sexual molestation, than in the general population. That according to the California Little Hoover Commission report in 2003, 30% to 70% of the children in California group homes do not belong there and should not have been removed from their homes. Final remarks. On my desk are scores of cases of exhausted families and troubled children. It has been beyond me to turn my back on these suffering, crying, and sometimes beaten down individuals. We are mistreating the most innocent. Child protective services have become adult-centered to the detriment of children. No longer is judgment based on what the child needs or who the child wants to be with or what is really best for the whole family. It is some adult or bureaucrat who makes the decisions, based often on just hearsay, without ever consulting a family member, or just what is convenient, profitable, or less troublesome for a director of DFCS. I have witnessed such injustice and harm brought to these families that I am not sure if I even believe reform of the system is possible. The system cannot be trusted. It does not serve the people. It obliterates families and children simply because it has the power to do so. Children deserve better. Families deserve better. It's time to pull back the curtain and set our children and families free. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Proverbs 31:8-9. Recommendations. 1. Call for an independent audit of the Department of Family and Children's Services, DFCS, to expose corruption and fraud. 2. Activate immediate change. Every day that passes means more families and children are subject to being held hostage. 3. End the financial incentives that separate families. 4. Grant to parents their rights in writing. 5. Mandate a search for family members to be given the opportunity to adopt their own relatives. 6. Mandate a jury trial where every piece of evidence is presented before removing a child from his or her parents. 7. Require a warrant or a positive emergency circumstance before removing children from their parents. Judge Arthur G. Christian, Utah Bar Journal, January, 1997 reported that except in emergency circumstances, including the need for immediate medical care, require warrants upon affidavits of probable cause before entry upon private property is permitted for the forcible removal of children from their parents. 8. Uphold the laws when someone fabricates or presents false evidence. If a parent alleges fraud, hold a hearing with the right to discovery of all evidence. Senator Nancy Schafer. 50th District of Georgia. Exhibit A. December 5, 2006. Jeremy's story. Some names withheld due to future hearings. As told to Senator Nancy Schafer by Sandra, XXXX, a foster parent of Jeremy for 2+ years. My husband and I received Jeremy when he was 2 weeks old and we have been the only parents he has really ever known. He lived with us for 27 months. XXXX is the grandfather of Jeremy, and he is known for molesting his own children, for molesting Jeremy and has been court-ordered not to be around Jeremy. XXXX is the mother of Jeremy, who has been diagnosed to be mentally ill, and also is known to have molested Jeremy. XXXX and Jeremy's uncle is a registered sex offender and XXXX is the biological father, who is a drug addict and alcoholic and who continues to be in and out of jail. Having just described Jeremy's world, all of these adults are not to be any part of Jeremy's life, yet for years DFCS has known that they are. DFCS had to test XXXX, the grandfather, and his son, XXXX, the uncle, and XXXX, to determine the real father. XXXX is the biological father, although any of them might have been. In court, it appeared from the case study that everyone involved knew that this little boy had been molested by family members, even by his own mother, XXXX. In court, 30, the mother of Jeremy, admitted to having had sex with XXXX, the grandfather, and XXXX, her own brother, that morning. Judge, XXXX, and DFCS gave Jeremy to his grandmother the same day. XXXX, the grandmother, is over 300 pounds, is unable to drive, and is unable to take care of Jeremy due to physical problems. She also has been in a mental hospital several times due to her behavior. Even though it was ordered by the court that the grandfather, XXXX, the uncle, XXXX, a convicted sex offender, XXXX, his mother who molested him and, XXXX, his biological father, a convicted drug addict, were not to have anything to do with the child, they all continue to come and go as they please at XXXX address, where Jeremy has been sentenced to live for years. This residence has no bathroom and little heat. The front door and the windows are boarded. See pictures. This home should have been condemned years ago. I have been in this home. No child should ever have to live like this or with such people. Jeremy was taken from us at age 2.5 years after, XXXX, obtained attorney, XXXX, who was the same attorney who represented him in a large settlement from an auto accident. I am told that attorney, XXXX, as grandfather's attorney, is known to have repeatedly gotten, XXXX, off of several criminal charges in White County. This is a matter of record and is known by many in White County. I have copies of some records. XXXX grandfather, through, XXXX attorneys, work, got, XXXX, the grandmother of Jeremy, legal custody of Jeremy. XXXX grandfather, who cannot read or write also got his daughter, XXXX, and son, XXXX, diagnosed by government agencies as mentally ill. XXXX grandfather, through legal channels, has taken upon himself all control of the family and is able to take possession of any government funding coming to these people. It was during this time that Jeremy was to have a 6-month transitional period between XXXX grandmother and my family as we were to give him up. The court-ordered agreement was to have been 4 days at our house and 3 days at XXXX grandmother. Dfcs stopped the visits within 2 weeks. The reason given by Dfcs was the child was too traumatized going back and forth. In truth, Jeremy begged us and screamed never to be taken back to XXXX his grandmother house, which we have on video. We, as a family, have seen Jeremy in stories time to time with XXXX grandmother, and the very people he is not to be around. At each meeting Jeremy continues to run to us wherever he sees us and it is clear he is suffering. This child is in a desperate situation and this is why I am writing, and begging you Senator Schaefer, to do something in this child's behalf. Jeremy can clearly describe in detail his sexual molestation by every member of this family and this sexual abuse continues to this day. When Jeremy was 5 years of age I took him to drive, XXXX, of Habersham County who did indeed agree that Jeremy's rectum was black and blue and the physical damage to the child was clearly a case of sexual molestation. Early in Jeremy's life, when he was in such bad physical condition, we took him to Eggleston Children's Hospital where at 2 months of age therapy was to begin 3 times a week. Dfcs decided that the XXXX grandparent family should participate in his therapy. However, the therapist complained over and over that the XXXX grandparent family would not even wash their hands and would cause Jeremy to cry during these sessions. XXXX the grandmother, after receiving custody no longer allowed the therapy because it was an inconvenience. The therapist reported that this would be a terrible thing to do to this child. Therapy was stopped and it was detrimental to the health of Jeremy. During XXXX grandmother custody, XXXX uncle has shot Jeremy with a BB gun and there is a report at XXXX County Sheriff's Office. There are several Amber Alerts at Cornelia Walmart, Commerce Walmart, and a 911 report from XXXX County Sheriff's Department when Jeremy was lost. XXXX grandmother, to teach Jeremy a lesson, took thorn bush limbs and beat the bottoms of his feet. Jeremy's feet got infected and his feet had to be lanced by drive, XXXX. Then Judy called me to pick him up after about 4 days to take back him to the doctor because of intense pain. I took Jeremy to drive, XXXX, in Gainesville. Drive, XXXX, said surgery was needed immediately and a cast was added. After returning home, XXXX, his grandfather and XXXX, his uncle, took him into the hog lot and allowed him to walk in the filth. Jeremy's feet became so infected for a second time that he was again taken back to drive, XXXX, and the hospital. No one in the hospital could believe this child's living conditions. Jeremy is threatened to keep quiet and not say anything to anyone. I have videos, reports, arrest records and almost anything you might need to help Jeremy. Please call my husband, Wendell, or me at any time. Sandra and XXXX, husband, XXXX. Exhibit B. Failure of DFCS to remove 6 desperate children. A brief report regarding 6 children that Habersham County DFCS director failed to remove as disclosed to Senator Nancy Schafer by Sheriff DeRay Fincher of Habersham County. Sheriff DeRay Fincher, Chief of Police Don Ford and Chief Investigator Lieutenant Greg Bowen Chief called me to meet with him immediately, which I did on Tuesday, October 16, 2007. Sheriff Fincher, after contacting the director of Habersham County DFCS several times to remove 6 children from being horribly abused, finally had to get a court order to remove the children himself with the help of 2 police officers. The children, 4 boys and 2 girls, were not just being abused, they were being tortured by a monster father. The 6 children and a live-in girlfriend were terrified of this man, the abuser. The children never slept in a bed, but always on the floor. The place where they lived was unfit for human habitation. The father on one occasion hit one of the boys across his head with a bat and cut the boy's head open. The father then proceeded to hold the boy down and sew up the child's head with a needle and red thread. However, even with beatings and burnings, this is only a fraction of what the father did to these children and to the live-in girlfriend. Sheriff Fincher has pictures of the abuse and condition of one of the boys, and at the writing of this report, he has the father in jail in Habersham County. It should be noted that when the DFCS director found out that Sheriff Fincher was going to remove the children, she called the father and warned him to flee. This is not the only time this DFCS director failed to remove a child when she needed to do so. See Exhibit A. The egregious acts and abhorrent behavior of officials who are supposed to protect children can no longer be tolerated. Senator Nancy Schafer, 50th District of Georgia.
This has been the Trump Breaking News Network. Please subscribe and share to stay up to date on the latest news about our president. Be informed.